You are listening to the ForceCom Frontline, bringing you to our soldiers on the front lines of readiness.
Hey everyone, welcome to the ForceCom Frontline. I'm Ashley and I'm your host. Today is part 2 of our Suicide Prevention Month episodes. Last time we heard from Chief Warrant Officer 3 Joel Rivera, who shared his story of overcoming depression and alcoholism. Today, with me is Kelsey Hurt, our ForceCom Suicide Prevention, Response, and Analysis Coordinator, and retired Command Sergeant Major Jason VanKleeck. So first I want to introduce Kelsey. Kelsey has been with the ForceCom Ready and Resilient office since 2013, and for the last 2.5 years has focused specifically on suicide prevention. In her role, she is a one-stop suicide prevention shop, doing everything from data input, validation, and analysis, interpreting and publishing suicide prevention policy and guidance, and reporting trends to subordinates in the ForceCom Command Group. Welcome, Kelsey. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So before we bring Jason into the conversation, I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about some of the things going on here at ForceCom in relation to suicide prevention.
Sure. The good news is we have a lot going on. The bad news is we have a lot going on.
Right.
I will do my personal disclaimer that I am not a licensed anything. My background is in psychology and in criminal justice, and I've been an Army spouse for almost a decade now.
It's amazing.
I know, time flies.
Oh gosh, I almost have too.
Yeah.
I'm really bad at dates though, so don't ask me what our anniversary is.
I was gonna say we did the courtroom wedding and then we did the big celebration exactly a year after. So we only have to remember one date.
We did too, but I still can't remember.
I was gonna say we did ours 12/21/12, which was the day the Mayans said the world was gonna end. So
that's awesome.
Either way, yeah.
All right, back on track.
Yes. So a lot going on. Like I said, we've got pilots kind of all over the place, especially across ForceCom. We have things like the DUSA's R4 tool pilot, which is a risk identification and mitigation tool. We had the G1 suicide prevention plan pilot at Forts, Hood, Campbell, and Bliss. And that had a myriad of things from visibility tools for commanders. It had resources with these embedded performance experts working on that mental health piece. And then it also had specific trainings. Here specifically at the headquarters, we do a lot. Our lines of effort include identifying, improving on how we identify and mitigate risk, improving our analysis capability of suicides. Now, granted, that is after the fact, but it can tell us a lot about kind of how to get left of the boom. Right. And then we also have working on some of those contributing factors. The big ones we see across ForceCom are relationship issues, work stress issues, behavioral health diagnoses and support, and then as well as just baseline resilience and really building up those protective factors as well.
All right. So before we get too far into this conversation, I want to bring in Jason. So welcome back, Jason, and thanks for being here again.
Hi. Thanks for having me back. It's great to be back and be back on this topic of conversation. So thanks for having me back.
Yeah, so last time you were here, we asked for some stories from soldiers, and we actually had one. He reached out, and I talked to him in our previous episode for this month, and he overcome depression and alcoholism. But I want to go back to what we talked about, and you talked about overcoming depression, but you also mentioned in the video that we posted to our social media that it's important for soldiers to not only maintain their weapons, but also their brains. And so I want to start there and dive a little deeper into that. Can you tell us what you mean by maintaining your brain?
So I'm a firm believer in the idea that most people, their struggle with their mental health is driven by their, just sitting around and doing nothing. And I use that weapons analysis because I think that it's I think it's soldier speak. I think that, sometimes we get wrapped up in the doctoral speak or the official term speak, instead of focusing on what can soldiers relate to, what terms can we use. And so when I talk about maintain your brain, just like you maintain your weapon. Like I said, I think when I dealt with my bouts of depression back, when I was a staff sergeant, and even today, I mean, it's not my issues are not as drastic now because I can recognize them, and I'm able to say, oh my gosh, I'm going down this bad path. But when I identify why, it's because I'm not maintaining my brain. I'm just sitting on the couch vegging out, or I'm letting the boredom thoughts take over. We're so used to being consistently mentally stimulated with social media and video games and 1,000 channels to watch. And when we don't do something to mentally stimulate ourselves, then we go into that dark hole. So I guess that's the best way to describe that.
Okay. And so in what you just said, you made me think, me and Kelsey were in a meeting recently. We were talking about social media and how it's very easy nowadays where we can just go on social media and we can paint this pretty picture of ourselves. We can make it look like everything is fine and dandy and we are the happiest person alive, where that's not actually reality, but that's today's generation, and that's how we operate now. So I don't know. I think it's a tricky thing to get after. But I just, go ahead.
I was going to say, I fully agree. I think it's a twofold problem. I think that the first part of that problem is that that what we see of everybody else gives us this false opinion that our life sucks. And because very rarely, I would say maybe even more, not so rare now. I think I see more conversation on social media of people being a little more open. But I would say historically, social media has been the glitz and glamour of everybody's life. And then if you're having a struggle in life, you're sitting there going, holy cow, everybody has this great life, but mine sucks. And so it feeds this mentality that really isn't real, because people normally aren't going to put their downtime on social media. They're not going to put their depressive moments. Now,
right.
I will say I think that I've seen more people being probably a little more open to it. I think that the conversation over the last couple of years has been churning more and more of people being open and truthful. I mean, you see it, heck, just now at the Olympics with Simone Biles, and there's people that are critical of her
right.
And what she chose to do, but I think there's more people that aren't critical, and I think that her willingness and her ability to be open about that. I've seen other interviews of stars out there that are willing to be open. But at the end of the day, so I think that's the first fold of it. I think the second fold is that because people aren't willing to be open on social media, everyone thinks that that you're just living this grand life, that you're, I tell people all the time, there's nobody in the world that thought Robin Williams was going to kill himself.
So true.
Nobody. And yet here he is, a man that was so sad and depressed, but he portrayed this outward appearance of the comedian, the clown, the happy guy. Next thing you know, he's committing suicide. So
right.
I think social media creates that dual issue there.
But Kelsey, wouldn't you even say, like, in, again, these meetings that we listen to, where we go over some of the suicides that have happened in ForceCom, a lot of times leaders are saying, this was super unexpected. We never thought that this would happen with this soldier.
Yeah, I think not just in like the social media perspective, but I think specific to kind of the Army, there's this professional persona and then a personal life persona. Yeah. And it takes a lot to be able to mesh those two together sometimes. So yeah, we often hear this came as a complete surprise, or we also do a social media deep dive after the suicides, and it's very clear. I mean, they're joking about how they're going to die by suicide.
Oh,
and
wow.
Yeah, so it's and actually even as when my husband was in command, we had a soldier that we almost regularly monitored on social media, and it was that constant, anytime he felt like something was going out of control, he would post about it. And I was friends with him on social media, and I'd be like, all right, you need to go talk to him. Let's make sure we wrap our arms around him. Yeah. So I definitely see that there's this kind of dark side to social media, of only showing the glamorous life. But I also think that there are ways to use it to our benefit, to not only understand people outside of their professional capacity, but also look for support where you may not have it in another place. So trying to find the good pieces of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I had actually reached out to the Atlanta Falcons and hoped to get Hayden Hurst to participate in this episode. And I don't know if either of you have seen his story, but he was pro baseball out of high school, I believe, was injured, and he attempted suicide, basically, survived, but now he shares his story in hopes of helping others. And really my goal with that conversation was to highlight that no matter how well somebody looks like they may be doing, no one really knows what's going on. I mean, you could be a pro baseball player. You could play for the NFL, whatever it is. We all have our struggles, and we're all a lot more alike than we might think. So I wanted to get your thoughts on that. Kelsey?
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely think that we all have a lot more things that can bring us together than divide us, even if those that divide us may get highlighted a little bit more prominently. I think the most important thing here is kind of looking at it as mental health and suicide prevention as a process. So if you know me in the workplace, I'm kind of a serial optimist. I always try to be a very positive person working in a very sad subject area. Yeah. But I have to practice that every day. And especially, my husband and I, we just finished 2 years geographically separated. So what mental health steps I took in the last 2 years look very different now that he's home. And,
sure.
And I know your husband's deployed right now too. Yeah. So just being able to build those different support systems and understanding kind of what impacts you and where, I think is always really important as we look at what kind of makes us the same and what kind of makes us different. But it's never a competition. It's never a battle. And just because someone has other things going on doesn't mean that your stuff isn't important. Right. So just trying to kind of understand all those pieces and make sure that a pat on the back, a phone call, a text message for some people, it just depends, reaching out and engaging in any way, especially kind of during this crazy COVID environment is just so important.
Right. What about you, Jason? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I just think that the more that we're open about what we deal with, and I think it starts at, I retired as a command sergeant major, but I was open about my issues from the time I was a sergeant first class. And I think that openness really helps people understand that it's okay, and I think that's where we get at. That's where we get at being a little more, like you said, left of the bang about it. With Hayden sharing his story is kind of the same. I share my story because I want people to realize that, I made it to sergeant major, but I had those issues as a staff sergeant.
Right.
And I think that there was, it's been shown over time that with other people I've talked to and stories I've heard from other people, that the more open we are, the better we are to influence someone else. I think that's our biggest hang up right now, is getting people to understand that this isn't uncommon. The more open we can be about it, then maybe the more able we are to see the problem, and not only in others, but in ourselves. And if we're that open about it, then we're able to just go get the help that we need. That's always, like I said, that's been my push, and I love hearing about people like Hayden that share their stories, because that's what we need. We just need more people to normalize that. Heck, I was just listening to a podcast the other day where Danica Patrick, famed IndyCar NASCAR driver, and she's like talking openly about going to counseling. And she's like, heck, I used to have 2 counselors at one time. Like, she's going to see 2 different counselors, you know?
Wow.
And I think that's important for people to hear, that, hey, like, it's not that uncommon. Like, just quit carrying the stigma that it is.
Well,
and the more we can get to share, the better.
And I would think too, or I think that when you are going through something like this, to know that you're not alone, to have these other people who have stepped up and said, yeah, I've gone through this, and I've gotten through it. It can be scary to be in a place that you don't know what's going on. Like after I had my daughter, I had postpartum anxiety, and I told this to another person. I can remember sitting in the car calling BH shaking because I was like, oh my gosh, what is wrong with me? And part of it's accepting that there's nothing physically wrong with you, but there's still something wrong with you. It's a really hard place to be in. So to know that other people have gone through that or are going through that, I think makes it a lot easier.
Yeah, and I know initially when I did re-listen to your episode this morning, Jason, and I was just thinking to myself, if I could just clone him and sprinkle him across ForceComm and really start to normalize some of these conversations. But then as I was kind of sitting on that, I was thinking, well, we have people out there that are like that. How do we encourage them to, come forward and tell their story? So I know you guys did a call to action in one of your first episodes. So I second that.
Yes.
Like, please come share your stories. You can't know what type of impact you're having on so many other people just by kind of speaking your truth and speaking your experiences.
Absolutely. So Kelsey, you are immersed in suicide prevention every day. So I wanted to get your thoughts. What do you think is the biggest challenge we face in preventing suicides?
So this is a huge question, and I was going to say, I will try not to take the entire episode on this because there are a lot of challenges. And I will say, I think the Army is a little bit of our own worst enemy. We recognize the protective factor of predictability, and yet here we are, pushing pilots out and having soldiers taken off of ranges and different other tasks that they had planned for because this is the priority now.
Yeah.
So I think just kind of the overall Army bureaucracy in and of itself and the taskings that are coming down day in, day out, causing work stress, causing family stress. I think that's all a huge barrier. I hate to say it, but sharing info, I will give a shout out. I think we have come so far, and the people that I have the privilege to work with, not only internal to this headquarters, in PMO, in PAO, in surgeon, in chaplain channels, in AG channels, in legal channels. We have all come really far working together, but even out in the field, we have division psychiatrists on the calls that we have. We have chaplains all over the place. We've got G1s. We've got a lot of people that really care. Suicide prevention program managers, CR2Is, but there are so many processes and procedures that are built up in these silos, and it's databases that don't talk to each other. It's above my pay grade, but people, holding on to information for job security.
Right.
We need to do a better job of sharing what we know when we know it.
Yeah.
Now, granted, that also comes with the double-edged sword of, the difference between having unrealistic expectations of our leaders. It's very nuanced process with a lot of barriers, but I think that the better we do continuing to have suicide prevention as a priority, incorporating it into our everyday lives and metal tasks. Character and caring is really important. So let's figure out how we do a better job of growing that and, quote unquote, institutionalizing that in the military.
Yeah. Well, I think what you said is important too. There are a lot of people, I think it's easy to say, oh, people care about suicide. No, there are some people within the Army who genuinely care about trying to fix the suicide problem. And that's probably not the right way to say that, but General Garrett, for instance, he could not be more passionate about suicide prevention, and he genuinely cares and wants to know how we can be better and how we can help soldiers. And I think that's important to know because, again, it's easy to say, oh, well, nobody cares in the Army. They just want me to deploy, whatever. But realistically, that's not the case. People do care.
Yeah, and it's at every echelon. You know, I've had the privilege to be a part of different inspections and go out to different places and be a part of sensing sessions. And, you know, definitely at the top, General Garrett, but every layer down to those first line supervisors who, you know, we've got them briefing these cases, and you can hear in their voice what it means to lose a soldier to suicide. And there are so many people that do care and extend themselves in these prevention efforts. And, you know, the more we have of those people, they're absolutely force multipliers. I'm just going to throw that buzzword in there, but I believe it.
So, Jason, we talked about this briefly already, but last time we talked about the stigma of getting mental health care. And this is really something that has been part of suicide prevention from the very beginning. Everybody thinking that there's a stigma around going to BH. Do you think that this is something we can get past, or we will ever get past? And not even just as the Army, but as a society as whole.
My blunt answer is no. I mean, and I know that's not the answer people want to hear, but I think that's the real answer. But
agreed.
On that, but on that note, I say no because you'll never get past it, but that doesn't mean that you don't get more people past it. I think it's shown with, once again, Simone Biles. There's people out there that criticized her, called her weak, called her, let your team down or whatever. And those people you're probably not going to convince about the stigma of mental health.
Right.
And that's okay. And that's okay. We don't need to, we're not going to be 100% solution. But as a leader, I told people all the time, can we be a 90% solution? 90 is an A. And if I can get A's, then my parents were happy.
Yeah.
And that's how I kind of see things in the world. I mean, there are some things we have to be perfect at. We have to be perfect at, the sharp issues. We have, those types of things, ethics, that kind of stuff. But I mean, that's just an honest answer. Is 90% is still an A.
Yeah.
And I think going back to the previous comments of I think the way to get further past the stigma is to put it on the forefront. This is one of my big talking points is changing the dialogue from instead of focusing on those that unfortunately made the choice, because it's a choice, to take their life, and instead let's try to find those people that didn't take their life. Let's show people that there is a way. And I know that there's some, having talked to you and General Garrett in the past, that there's some programs out there that are being tested to kind of get the mental health more on the forefront down at the unit level, because I think if we can do that, then we will defeat that stigma a little more, because it becomes more normalized. The more we can normalize and be open about our problems, and I think the less people are going to be negative about it. And it's not going to happen overnight. I've been on this pitch for years, I mean, and now I would say in the last couple of years, I get more people that are open with me. And I'll be honest with you, I've been sharing my story a long time, and it's taken a long time to get traction. You can only influence your scope, right? So, but I've gotten more traction over time. But I'll be honest with you, I have yet to have someone tell me, "Oh, you're such a wuss," or, "Oh, you had mental health problems, you're weak." Now, there may be people out there that think that, but they've never said it to me. Right. But I can tell you that the number of people that are like, "I needed to hear your story. Your story just changed my life." I mean, whether it's messages on Facebook, whether it's a private talking to me at behavioral health, telling me that I'm the reason he was there. You know, that to me is what the value is. And that's how we're going to get beyond the stigma. We will never totally remove the stigma.
Yeah.
But I will say also, I think that the idea of the stigma has become its own stigma also. I think that almost to the point of people are, well, why don't you go to behavioral health? Well, because of the stigma. Well, what's stigma? You know, and I think that they've created that into a stigma. And so it's going to take time, but we got to kind of look at how we're tackling it, at what level we're tackling it at. And it's not going to be fixed overnight. I still have conversations with people that are like, heck, I just had a conversation with a fellow Sergeant Major who said, hey, I reached out to behavioral health and told them, hey, I'm in a bit of a crisis moment. I need to see my counselor. And he could not get an appointment for weeks.
Yeah.
It wasn't, oh gosh, how do we drop everything and make sure this guy's good? It was, well, we can see you in 2 weeks. Wait, I'm personally telling you I'm having a crisis moment. And so it is going to take time. It is going to take some concerted effort to make sure that we have the right people at the right level to be able to handle the numbers are, but I think it can be done. And I think the more we do it, the more the stigma goes away.
And Jason, I think you also bring up an interesting point. You know, there are wait times for different services, but that's also why it's so important to know the resources that are out there. I wasn't kidding when I said, you know, there's a lot going on in the suicide prevention realm, day in and day out. And, you know, there are chaplains, there are your military family life counselors, there are, you know, through Military One Source, there's the Veterans Crisis Line, there's the National Helpline. Not saying that all of those should be used in a crisis, but there are different levels for different interventions and different types of support. So constantly staying educated and educating others on those resources is a huge win in my book.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point.
And I'll say this too, on that same note, and this person that I spoke about, I mean, totally different situation, and everybody's situation is different. I get that, but I think the other key is, and this is something that I try to push a lot, is get help early. You know, like, and so we're not at a catastrophic phase. We're not at the weapons failure phase. You know, and once again, putting it in terms that soldiers understand of your brain is your most important weapon, and you got to maintain that weapon. And so if we just allowed ourselves to ignore taking care of our rifle, eventually it's going to break, and now it's the catastrophic problem, and it's not doing us any good. And so I think back to what you said, like using the chaplain, using the family life counselor, using whatever resources available at the lowest level. That I tell people all the time, do regular maintenance. And if you think you're going to wait until you're at the catastrophic phase, then you've waited too long. And I think if we can get that, and that's what leads to people going, behavioral health ruined my career. Well, what do you mean behavioral health ruined your career? Well, because I went to behavioral health and they said X, Y, and Z was wrong with me, and so now they're getting chaptered out of the Army. Well, how long were you having these issues? Oh, I've been dealing with these issues for a year. Well, why didn't you go a year ago? If you'd have gone maybe a year ago or 8 months ago, then maybe we would have, stopped it early, and now we're not at the catastrophic phase. So at the end of the day, it's going to take a lot of people to just say, I'm getting help and I'm going to do it. And I don't care what anybody thinks. And I'm the guy that's telling you that I have yet for someone to tell me that I suck or I'm weak. And there are probably people that think it. I don't care, because at the end of the day, I had issues as a staff sergeant. I retired as a sergeant major, and I'm living a successful life outside of that. And that's what matters. And so that's how we kind of probably got to defeat that, is put the help up front. Get help up front. And the more resources we make up front and we make it a norm, we got to treat our mental health as important as our physical health, I think we can defeat this a little bit. The stigma, I think, comes from, if you go to behavioral health, your career's ruined. Well, no. Your career's ruined because you went to behavioral health too late.
Yeah. It's funny that you bring that up. I spoke last month to a specialist at Fort Carson who is Miss Colorado. And her big platform is encouraging service members to seek mental health care. And I asked her what her bottom line up front is on mental health care. And she said, do it now. Go today. Like, don't wait. And so it is important to just, in the way she put it was, this should just be a thing that we do. We go to the doctors for yearly checkups. Let's do the same with our mental health.
Yeah, I can personally say that the 2 years that my husband and I were geographically separated, I definitely put my mental health on the back burner. It was definitely not a preventative measure. It was all making sure that I could, get to the next day, get to the next week, and,
right.
Start my countdown instead of count up. And now being on the other side of it and being in a more prevention phase of marital crisis, being able to do marital counseling when it's not a crisis is such a breath of fresh air. It's amazing. And I am a big believer and a big supporter, and I am absolutely an advocate. So, and you don't have to be married for some of these services too.
Yeah.
That's a huge thing. Our idea of the Army family has changed. So girlfriends, significant others, it doesn't have to be a spouse. Make sure that you are maintaining those relationships in that prevention phase as opposed to that crisis intervention.
Yeah. And I'll say, after I had my daughter and I had anxiety, really I had anxiety my entire life. And it just kind of all fell into place at that point when I finally decided I needed to get some help. And now I look back and I'm like, I'm not worried about silly things anymore. And it's nice to not feel like that and not have that weight on you worrying about, well, I ordered this thing online but now it doesn't fit and now I got to send it back. But how am I going to send it back? And you look back and you're like, I worried about the stupidest things, but at the time it was big to me.
Yeah.
And it's small things like that make you kind of think, oh my gosh, what is going on with me? And then you look back and you're like, I got past it. I'm not like that anymore.
Yeah.
So Jason, since you brought up Simone Biles, let's just go there. I thought it was really interesting. So I saw a lot of stuff on my Facebook and Twitter from people that I know offering support. But then I also saw a lot of people saying that she was a quitter. And I honestly hadn't considered that when I had first seen that she had withdrew herself. But I kept coming back to it. And I've had this conversation with people in my office too, that if you have a broken bone, you go to the doctor. But here's this girl who is saying, my head is not right. I can't do this. If she would have broken her bone, nobody would have said anything. But because it wasn't a bone and it was something that nobody could see, we were able to debate whether or not she was a quitter or she was actually doing the right thing. So I just wanted to get your guys' thoughts on that whole thing. So Kelsey, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, I had all the emotions on this one. I went through this left and right. I wanted everybody's opinion just to really look at myself and see how I felt about it. And, it's funny talking about broken bones. One of the comparisons that I saw was to Carrie Strug when she broke her ankle in the 96 Olympics. And the fact is also, like, why do we have to choose of those two, which is heroic?
Right.
If you're not okay, it's okay that you're not okay.
Right.
And if you want to push forward and that is what you feel is right for you at that time, then push forward.
Yeah.
And I just think we need to be able to make sure that we have that support system regardless of the individual choice.
Yeah.
We don't have to determine one's heroic and one's not.
But why is it for me to say too? Like, why is it for me to say, oh, she's just a quitter, there's nothing wrong with her? We're not her. It's not for me to say.
Yeah, and with such a complex behavioral mental health issue, why would you not, again, support
Right.
whatever decision that individual makes? It's hard enough for individuals to come and ask for help.
Yeah.
So if they're doing that, if they're putting that in the forefront, I think as leaders, as peers, as individuals, I think we all should support that individual, especially knowing, kind of their balance of protective and risk factors and what's going on in their life.
But to even be able to stand up and say there's something wrong on that big of a platform, it takes a lot.
Huge.
So, Jason, what are your thoughts?
So, one, people feel like they can give their opinion, or they think their opinion matters because that's just the social media world, right?
Right.
So I'm going to tell you that I think she quit because I have social media and I can do that. Okay, whatever. Unlike Kelsey, I'm not an ultimate optimist.
That's okay.
I'm sometimes I'm like, man, like I'm kind of more. Why am I so pessimistic about a lot of stuff?
I'll send you my positive affirmations book.
But don't be fooled. Like, towards the end of my career, or, well, not towards the end, but a good chunk of my senior leader career, I'm like, gosh, why am I so pessimistic? But and I had some commanders that were my battle buddies, and they were like the optimists, right? And so maybe it was good. But my point to that is that when this whole Simone Biles thing happened, initially I'm like, what in the world, right? But I'm pretty in tune with my mental health, and so I like to try to take that into consideration. And this was my thought. I wasn't critical of her. And my honest thought was this. She is the greatest gymnast in the world. She's devoted her entire life to, countless hours, days, weeks, months, years to perfecting and being the best at what she does. And I find it silly that anybody would honestly go, oh, she's just a quitter. As a soldier, I like to think, I was pretty successful. I was, not once did I just go, well, I'm just going to quit doing this because I'm successful at it. And I don't know, whenever I hear people, talk about athletes or the GOATs of the world, right? The greatest of all time of the world. And I'm a LeBron James hater. Like I just am, but the guy is one of the greatest basketball players of all time. And I can be critical of him with, sitting on the bench or taking games off. But at the end of the day, these guys, they dedicate their life to that. And so I think it's kind of silly when we are willing to go, oh, you just quit. Why? Why would they do that? Like, there's so much on the line for them to do that it just doesn't, to me, it doesn't make sense. Be critical, but your criticality is almost silly because they have absolutely dedicated their every being to being what they are, that for you to think that they just one day woke up and was like, all right, I'm done. Or I'm going to just quit on my team it's almost preposterous. But you're not going to convince those people of that. So
those people also can't do a cartwhile. They're
not sure I can do a very good cartwheel.
Yeah, it's easy to sit on my couch and eat Cheetos and talk trash, but
right.
But at the end of the day, they didn't just wake up that day and go, I'm the best in the world and now I'm just going to be a quitter. Okay, you can believe that if you want, I guess, but not this guy. So
again, I feel like it goes back to, who are we to judge? We have no idea. Like you said, she worked, her whole life towards this. And so to do something like that, that wasn't a decision that was taken lightly.
Yeah. So whatever. It's even like, because some people were like, oh, because she wasn't performing well, she just decided that, well, I'm just going to quit then. And I'm thinking, that's not their way of doing things. Like, people that are the there's reasons that athletes stick around too long. And the reason they stick around too long is because they mentally truly believe that they still have it and they can show it one more time. It's very rare that an athlete walks away in their prime. And so I just find that, it's just weird. I mean, like I said, everybody thinks their opinion matters because social media lets them believe that.
It's easy to type behind a keyboard.
Yeah, but even and to tie that back to mental health, like I will tell you right now, in the last year, I have removed some people from my life that have been friends my whole adult life because they thought that because they had a social media voice that they could do, say, act, whatever they want. And I'm like, I don't need you as part of my life. I like to have you as part of my life, but you're not doing me any good with the way that you act, speak, however on social media. And I've literally eliminated some friends from my life because it just wasn't healthy.
Yeah.
And that's the reality of social media. But at the end of the day, I control the narrative on my Facebook page and or on my social media platforms. And I have a public social media platform also that has thousands of followers, and I don't control it as much there because I mentally am able to say, hey, look, you put yourself out there as a public figure on this social media page, so as long as they're not disrespectful or saying things that are just unbelievable, like they have that voice on that page. But on my personal page, you don't necessarily get that capability because I'm not going to allow you to impact me mentally.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the sad part about the Simone Biles story is that in 20 years, we won't be looking back and saying, well, let's see what her taking a knee at the Olympics actually did for the next 20 years of her life. I would love for that to be an expose, but I don't see that happening.
Yeah.
I mean, at the end of the day, her backing out afforded another athlete the opportunity to show her skills because they had to find a replacement. And here's the thing. Here's the thing. If she would have kept going, they wouldn't have won gold anyways.
Right.
Because she wasn't performing to her top level as it was. And I mean, if the idea that whatever her health, the twisties is, what they claim she had wrong with her, okay, we could have continued to push her just like they did, 15, 20 years ago as we watched all those athletes, try to go out there on broken ankles and all kinds of health issues. Like, great, they looked tough, but I've saw multiple articles with those same athletes now, and they're like, it was one of the dumbest things I ever did was to continue to push. Yeah, in the moment it was great, but here we are 15, 20 years later, and they're telling you it was bad for my body, it was bad for my mental health.
Right.
And so let those people, you're not going to convince them otherwise. They're going to have an opinion about her. At the end of the day, 6 months from now, no one will it won't matter because the Winter Olympics will be here. We'll be worried about somebody else.
Right. All right. So Kelsey, I'm going to switch gears a little bit on you. So we've been talking a lot about, negative and suicide and whatnot, but there are also a lot of stories about soldiers intervening and helping other soldiers. So do you have an example or can you share a story that you've heard?
Sure. So the one thing I am very lucky in my position that I see dozens, maybe even hundreds of, intervention stories. And it's everything shared by peers, experienced myself, when I talked about that social media post, kind of monitoring. And honestly, one of the best VTCs I've ever sat in was one of the Vice's A Life Worth Living sessions where he had a panel of NCOs and they were talking about different times that they've intervened. So,
wow.
Yeah, so I've really heard the goodness from, an NCO and first line supervisor trusting their gut and being able to break down one of their soldiers' doors and cut him down before he died from hanging.
Wow.
I mean, we've seen people utilize technology to be able to pinpoint exactly where soldiers are to cut down response time.
Wow.
We've seen a soldier at let's say Fort Riley, Kansas, contact a soldier in Germany who knew someone at Fort Drum, and that communication team, I guess, or link ended up saving a life.
It's amazing.
It truly is amazing. And, some people come in there with the training, whether it be assist training or ASSI, Ask Care Escort Suicide Intervention training, or if it's someone who's just truly caring or aware and knows the resources, whether in the community or even the first step of bringing someone to an emergency room and department. These successful intervention stories are happening all over the place. So to the listeners out there, if you're not involved in some way, shape, or form in suicide prevention efforts, I definitely encourage you to do that. There's just so many ways to get involved. And like I said, knowing resources is such a huge win when we can do that.
Yeah. And so, Jason, you retired from the Army as a command sergeant major. And so you spent your entire adult life in the Army. And one of the things we often talk about is the importance of speaking up or reaching out to someone if something seems off. So having been a soldier who has suffered from depression, how would you have reacted if a peer had asked you how you were doing? Do you think you would have been able to be honest?
I don't know. Well, I say that in the sense of at that time, it was a different era, right?
Sure.
So, that was my real issues were in, 04, 05 time frame. 05, I guess, really. And so it was kind of different. But I will tell you this. I had this situation with somebody else. And I was at an event. One of my peers was at this event. And I could just kind of tell, like, seeing his social media stuff and conversations with him. I knew some stuff going on in his life and whatnot. It was just kind of weird. And so sure enough, we're out one day at this event, and I just looked him dead in the face and said, are you doing okay? And his initial answer was, yeah, I'm fine. I was like, and I told him, I said, okay, because I've noticed on your social media you've been posting some stuff, that's a little off and, related to X, Y, and Z, and I know you're having some issues at home. He's like, no, I'm good. Okay. So a week later, I get a text from him. He's like, hey, you in your office? Yep. He's like, can I come by? Absolutely. So he comes by, closes the door. We start talking, and he's like, hey, when you asked me last week if I was off or something was wrong, and I told you no, I said, yeah. He goes, well, I lied to you, and I just wanted to come and tell you that I lied to you, and I apologize. And we had a long conversation about the issues he was dealing with and getting help and what. And here's my point. Some people are going to tell you, well, yeah, but he lied to you. But I didn't take it as that. Because I think on the face of it, the initial reaction from most people would be, no, I'm fine.
Yeah.
But what I did was I planted the seed in his head that I cared. I planted the seed in his head that I noticed. And I think if you asked him, he would tell you that was stronger than anything. Not so much whether he told me the truth in that moment, and I'm sure part of that conversation when I asked him and he told me he was fine, I'm sure part of that conversation was, well, I'm here, I'm always here for you, and I'm here to support you, whatever, right? And so that's kind of, I think, the key takeaway here is we always say, if you see something, say something, right? Mm-hmm. And you can apply it to this situation too, where I knew something was off. I said something to him, but I'm not going to let me badger him into admitting that he's, having some depression or whatever. But he sure as heck knew when he walked away from there that I knew and that I cared enough to ask. And so here we are a week later, and now he's kind of, okay, now let me go and address it. Yeah. So I think that's the bigger takeaway. Like I said, unfortunately, when I went through my depressive era, I don't know what I would have done because it was a long time ago and it was a different era, and the way things were handled honestly were different. Yeah. But I think in today's era, just like this was and I'm telling you, when I had this conversation with him, it was probably 2018. So it wasn't that long ago. And so I think that, to me, that's probably the bigger takeaway, was that he, up front, he's not going to probably just be blunt with you. Some people will, but gosh, man, if you let people know you care, if you let people know that you notice, you're planting the seed in their head, and I think it ultimately comes back around. We got to be willing to care, to notice, and to just ask them.
Yep.
And I think ultimately it'll pay off in the long run.
I think that is the big takeaway. So you both are very passionate about this topic, and I think we could probably go on forever. I have some notes down here that I wrote that we're not even going to get to, but I want to, since you both are busy and we could talk forever, I want to give you both a moment to give me your bottom line up front on mental health, suicide prevention, whatever it is. So Kelsey, I'll go with you first.
Sure. And I know I said I could talk forever on barriers, so I'm going to jump right back to that real quick. But there is a lot of misinformation out there. There's a lot of myths. So I just would ask, maybe plead, that people just try to be educated and understand, like I said, not only what resources are out there, but some cold hard facts for FORSCOM. Our suicide rate has doubled in the last 5 years. When we compare it to the normalized U.S. civilian rate, it's double that. So do we have an issue? Yeah, we definitely have an issue.
Yeah.
That needs attention and focus. For every suicide, up to 135 people are affected by a single suicide. So not just the individual and their close-knit, but see what that impact looks like. And especially, I would argue it's even bigger in a close-knit unit, Army type setting. I know we don't like to talk responsible firearm ownership. I am a permit-wielding, privately owned weapons owner. But the fact is that we have to have responsible firearm ownership, and not just for suicides. But one of the emerging trends is that soldiers are going to a friend's house or a family member's house and using their privately owned weapon.
Yep.
So it's not just protection from yourself, but that even goes further into negligent discharges and affecting, harming or even killing family, friend members that way. I know that Jason was talking about going up and really asking that soldier what was going on. That is not going to put suicide in their head. You've got to ask these people directly, are you going to kill yourself? And faced with that kind of cold, hard truth, hard look in the mirror, I think you can really make some differences out. I know you can make some differences out there.
Talking about suicide does not make somebody commit suicide.
Correct.
All right, Jason, what about you?
So I'm going to just throw some key phrases at you that I like to throw around. And one is, your brain is your most important weapon, and you got to do weapons maintenance on it. And that's doing it regularly, doing it up front. The thing I would tell people is committing suicide is a choice, and I encourage you to choose to live. That's one of my big, my campaigns is choose to live. And I have yet to find someone who commits suicide and everyone else is going, man, I'm glad that guy killed himself. And so my point to that is, just like Kelsey said, like you're impacting over 100 people with that one choice. Yeah. And the help is out there. But at the same time, be willing to try to get that help early, before it does impact your career, before it does impact other lives around you. There are people out there willing to talk to you. They may not, and just like me, there's people who reach out to me every day. I don't have the answer for everybody, and counseling may not be the answer for you. But if you're having those thoughts, those doubts, that depression, reach out and let somebody know, and we'll get you in the right direction to get you the help you need. At the end of the day, nobody wants to lose anybody from the team. Right. And ultimately, I think my biggest thing is change the dialogue. And if you have the ability to change the dialogue of how we tackle this, share your story, because that's what I'm trying to do. I try to share my story because historically we have focused on the person that killed themselves and how do we prevent the next one. If we could find the people that chose not to and they got the help they needed and get them to share their stories, that's changing the dialogue. It lets people know that they're not alone. It lets people know that there are others out there dealing with the same issues they had and they overcame it. But you got to be willing to share your story to even change that dialogue. And I think if we can change that mentality where we're focusing on those and those people that are willing to share their stories, it lets other people know that there's light out there. There's light at the end of the tunnel.
Yep.
And so that's probably my biggest takeaway is do your weapons maintenance, maintain your brain, and if you got a story, please share it, even anonymously. Whether you send it to, whether it's you send it to me on social media or you send it to you guys at ForceCom. The story is what matters, and it doesn't mean you have to necessarily put your name and face to it if you don't feel comfortable with it. But that's my biggest takeaway.
All right, thank you. So Kelsey, before we go, I'm going to let you go through some resources. So what do you got?
Yeah, so I know we've touched on a lot of resources throughout this conversation. You've got your chaplains, your military family life counselors. Those are found through Military One Source. They have a great app, so download that for either your iPhone or your Android, or me, I have a Google phone. And then also, you've got your behavioral health. You've got so many not-for-profits. I don't want to endorse any specifically, but please go out and you can just Google them. There's a lot of great veteran supporting organizations out there. But just so you guys have this, the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, 1-800-273-TALK or 8255. If you press 1, that's going to be your veterans crisis line or military crisis line. And then they even have that texting option for 838-255. So just wanted to make sure that everybody had at least one in their pocket to reach out for help.
All right. Thank you. Well, again, both of you, thank you for your openness. Thank you for talking with me today. Thank you for your honesty. I really appreciate it. And thank you guys for being here.
Thanks for having us.
You.
That's it for this episode. As a reminder, it is okay to not be okay. There are people who care about you and want to help. And if you see someone who doesn't seem like themselves, reach out and check on them. Next month, we'll be talking with our ForceCom Best Warrior winners and learn more about how they prepared for the Army competition. In the meantime, you can find all of your ForceCom news on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And we'll see you next time on the Frontline.